The Hornets are competitive. LaMelo Ball is averaging 30 points a game. They're getting maybe a little healthier, but the Hornets lose both of their games to the Celtics. LaMelo is fouling out. What's going on? How do we assess this Hornets basketball team? We'll talk about it today on Locked On Hornets.
You are Locked On Hornets, your daily Charlotte Hornets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free. We're available anywhere you get your pods, and that does include YouTube. Want to give a quick shout out to FanDuel because, well, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. You guessed it. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Also, we have a daily newsletter, your favorite podcast, Locked On Hornets, of course. We are introducing the Locked On Hornets daily newsletter, one stop for the ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now, lockedondaily.com. That's lockedondaily.com. Start your day with the all-new free Locked On Hornets newsletter. There's the guy writing it, Doug Branson. You can find him writing other stuff on his Substack, everyhornetsboxscore.com. He's writing text messages to you on his subtext if you want to subscribe there as well. And I'm Walker Mehl. Listen to me on WFNZ every weekday on Weston Walker from 12 to 3 p.m. What a weekend. We knew we were in store for a big weekend with this squad. We just didn't know how competitive the Hornets would be against what I think most people would say is the best team in the league. 2 games back-to-back, Friday night. It's close until it's not, and the officials decide to take over. Even when they're down and the game is still decided, the game's already over. The officials want to let you know that they're still here by blowing the whistle. Hornets, they lose 124-109 to the Celtics on Friday night, and then it's a 113-103 loss the second night of a back-to-back. Brandon Miller comes back, but you also do not have your starting centers in that game with Mark Williams continuing to sit out and Nick Richards. Okay, a couple big
seems
stories
important.
here.
Seems important to have a center. It seems important.
Yeah, no, and they don't. they have Grant Williams and they have other players, but they don't have centers right now. There's lots of storylines here. The first being LaMelo, because you have the good and you have the bad. LaMelo Ball was sensational offensively, specifically, but he was sensational. The 3-point shots, the off-balance 3-point shots, Doug, still getting in the paint and finding shooters as well. A complete control. I think LaMelo's doing, for the most part, whatever he wants to with the basketball in his hands, and he is on fire. Like I think he's a top 15 offensive player in the league right now. When you have somebody playing that well, you'd like for them to be on the floor as much as possible. But what's happening is he's not only fouling out here and there, he's fouling out in 50% of the games that he's played this year. And the game that there's one game he didn't foul out where he committed 5. He committed 5 fouls. And just for reference, in this weekend, the 2 games against Boston, he fouled out both of those games, Doug. And Charles Lee, he's taken notice and he's talking about it during the post-game press conference. What did he have to say, Doug?
So in the postgame, he said that when asked about LaMelo's fouls, it's probably a little bit of different terminology, different techniques we're working on. We're trying to continue to challenge him, though. We have to learn if he can guard one-on-one, if we need to send a double team every time. So as a staff, we need to determine what we're comfortable with. Also, through conversations with him, can he just sit down and guard his yard, showing his hands and defending without fouling? He went on to say, we don't want to shake anybody's hand after they score, but I can live with tough end of shot clock fadeaway jumpers. It's the blow-bys or non-competitive fouls that are the issue. And it's not just Melo, it's a collective group effort. Walker, nice dismount there with the sort of, it's a collective group effort. But a lot of what he said previously was directly targeted at LaMelo Ball.
That last sentence almost somewhat serves as a Men in Black neuralizer. Forget everything I just said about specifically LaMelo. I'm actually referencing everybody. Even if 95% of this comment was about LaMelo, probably, I don't know if he was asked about that question. I'm sure he was with LaMelo, but 95 of it about LaMelo, the last 5, not so much, just to say, hey, it's all the team. And maybe that's true, but the entire team hasn't fouled out twice over the weekend, and another time where they have 5. How do we assess LaMelo's play here, Doug? Like, what are the takeaways here? Because the dude is so clearly going off. Like, what he's doing is remarkable, and that's the thing, right? It's you want the guy averaging 30 points a game, shooting 40% from 3 on the court as long as possible, especially in crunch time when winning time matters.
It's not that he's not trying hard on defense. Maybe that was an issue several years ago, but it's not an issue now. He actually is committed to playing harder on the defensive end, and I think what we're running into here, and Lee is sort of alluding to this, is that you have a player that's trying really hard that doesn't necessarily have the foundation as a defender, the techniques, as he said, and maybe it's different terminology, maybe that has to do with it too. And LaMelo is kind of admitting this too, saying, they're going to continue to work on this in the film room. It's a guy trying very hard and not necessarily being able to stay with a guy, and maybe the matchups are a little bit tougher this season. He's taken that on, and a lot of the fouls that he committed, particularly in that second game against the Celtics, were against Jason Tatum. And Jason Tatum is going to be a difficult guard for anyone. And so I think we've seen LaMelo lock up Jason Tatum for a possession here or there prior to this season. What I think the challenge for LaMelo is, how do you defend a guy like that for an entire game and not make these silly sort of slap down fouls? Lee called them non-competitive fouls. What's happening a lot when you look at the film is that he'll get slightly beat, and instead of just trusting the help or just saying, look, I'm beat on this play, all right, next, I'll get him next time. It's, I'm going to get beat here, and I'm going to try to recover and slap down on an arm. And so there's that category. And then some of them, honestly, are just sort of insane fouls where, he'll challenge a Jason Tatum jump shot and hit him on the elbow. It's just you can't do that. There are some of these fouls that you really can't explain other than LaMelo has to know better and know his own importance to the team to say, I can't make this kind of foul. I can't as aggressively go after Jason Tatum on this jump shot because I've got to be available in the fourth quarter.
Well, and sometimes I think LaMelo, it didn't happen, but there was one play where he left Drew Holiday wide open on a 3. I forget what quarter it happened, but he left Drew Holiday wide open over the weekend. And it's because he's leaving his guy to go contest down low. But of course, it's just a smart guard relocates, wide open 3-pointer, drains it. I don't want him picking up even some of the cheap fouls where he leaves his assignment to go kind of faulty help somebody else with the basketball down low, the basketball somewhere else, and you kind of just make your own decision, even if you do want to be pesky. I get the idea that you're trying to make something happen, but also if you get burned, then the team gives up a 3-point shot because of a decision that you decided to make. So it's just those types of plays as well. Charles Lee in this comment is telling you, we got to figure out if we got to help you, right? If we have to help you, then I don't really want you leaving your assignment unless we're helping the helper and you get that whole thing. But we got to help you. And he's just kind of saying what it is right now. If you can't do this, that's fine to a certain degree. We just have to adjust if you're not going to fully buy in. And somehow it's sometimes, Doug, that's a different form of motivation possibly.
See, to me, this isn't about buy-in. What I see from LaMelo is a guy who has bought into playing more defense. It's that he doesn't have the ability. And so this season was always going to be about evaluation. And I think you're dead on. They are challenging him. And he said it in the quote, to guard his yard. Go in there and try to lock up Jason Tatum. He doesn't. Jason Tatum's so good at baiting fouls. And look, I didn't preface I should have prefaced by saying that some of the officiating in these two games was just absolute garbage. And I think, I don't get on here and rail against officials very much. So when I say it, I feel like it does actually have a little bit of weight. And it was noticeable, the discrepancy between how the whistle was going for Charlotte versus how it was going with Boston, which was strange because it's in Charlotte. I mean, it's not even in Boston.
Right. That's the whole thing. First game was particularly egregious, especially as we're getting to the fourth quarter, and you got all these flagrants, and the Celtics are just living at the foul line with LaMelo fouling out 155. It was Grant right before that. So now you're talking about a 6-point game that extends to 9-point lead, that extends to double digits, game over. The first game was particularly egregious.
But and on the same token, these guys, Trae Young, Luka Doncic, Jason Tatum, the best players in the league know how to get guys to foul them. And so you have to counter that as a defender with trying to avoid that at all, if at all possible. I mean, look, the guy that he's going to go up against tonight, his fellow draftmate, Anthony Edwards, is not fouling out of games. He's managing to do a little bit of defending without fouling out of games. I mean, it's possible to go up against Jason Tatum without getting 6 fouls. And so that's what they have to figure out here. And if it means they've got to give LaMelo a little bit of help on the defensive end, well, that may be how this eventually goes. It's clear that they are using the beginning part, particularly with some of the injuries to Brandon and the centers. They're using the beginning part of this season to figure out what guys can do and what they can't do. And right now, LaMelo cannot guard one-on-one the elite players in the league without fouling.
Let me ask you one question. That'll be a fine. I'll pay up. Well, here's one more question for you about the whole fouling thing. How much does Mark Williams, having one center out there particularly, but how much does Mark help with that specific fact about LaMelo?
It helps tremendously because, like I said at the beginning of the segment, there's a portion of this where I see LaMelo not trusting that there's going to be help. And so he's taking it on his own and slapping down, and particularly recovering if a guy gets by him. There's that. But again, this is so multi-layered. He was aggressively trying to defend Jason Tatum near the end of that second Celtics game with 5 fouls. And when I say aggressively, I mean like putting his hands in trying to get a steal. Jason Tatum's going to see that, and he's going to try to draw the foul. And so there's a not trusting, there's a Mark Williams factor, there's a maturity factor, there's an understanding factor, there's a technique factor. And again, this is not going to be an easy problem to solve for Charles Lee and LaMelo Ball.
Well, it's been here for a while. If we're pleased with the progress that LaMelo is making in plenty of other areas in his game, this is one where we're not seeing the improvement. In fact, it even got worse at the beginning of this season with how many foul outs he's had and how many fouls overall he's had. All right, coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Bees everywhere!
We'll give you other observations over the weekend. Miles Bridges, are we worried about his play? Tidjane Salaun, the rookie, getting minutes against the defending champs early in the first quarter. He's seeing some minutes. We have plenty more to get to right here on LOH.
This episode of Locked On Hornets is sponsored by BetterHelp. I'd like to take a moment to thank someone, and that someone is my baby. She is my ultimate get out of doing something I don't want to do card, and I've been using it for a solid 3 years now without fail. She also enriches my life in ways that words fail, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, this month is all about gratitude, and along with my baby, there's another person we don't get to thank enough, and that is ourselves. It's sometimes hard to remind ourselves that we are trying our best to make sense of everything, and in this crazy world, that isn't always easy. Here's a reminder to send some thanks to the people in your life, including yourself. It's a little bit easier to thank yourself when you're feeling like the best version of yourself, and a great place to do that is therapy. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapist anytime for no additional charge. Let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA.
With all the foul trouble conversation with LaMelo, clearly he has been a guy that has helped the Hornets even stay in these games with how well he's been playing offensively. He has really been ridiculous. Like it's an issue. You can't foul out of the game. That should not be something that is a controversial take. That should be understood. You can't foul out of the game. I'm sure people will take some controversy with it, but it shouldn't be a controversial take. Miles, on the other hand, has not been all that good offensively. he's not fouling out, but also, Doug, I think what we've seen the start of the season, especially over the weekend for Miles Bridges, I don't know how much he's helping you offensively or all that much defensively right now, but especially with the way that the shot is not falling. If you look over the last couple of games and really over the entire season, he's not been very efficient. We talked about at the beginning of the year, the offseason, that Miles was going to embrace this third option role, and it was really cool. Like, he was very open about understanding this is LaMelo's team. Brandon Miller is a star in the making. Maybe the role had to shift for Miles just a little bit with Brandon being out, but even with Brandon out, Doug, we didn't see the same type of basketball for Miles in his like second option, even first option role. And really, the scoring was had by Trey Mann, and that's continued, really, especially in that first game against Boston, where I thought he was really good. Getting choked up over it so much. That's not a fine. I'm just getting choked up for it.
Gotcha.
So with Miles over the weekend shooting, what was it in the first game? Miles shot 5 of 16 in that game one against the Celtics, and then he shot 2 of 6, only 6 field goal attempts, only made 2 of them. It's not been pretty for him the entire year. He's shooting under 40% on the season. He's not shooting well from 3 despite pretty high volume too at 6 attempts per game. He's not hitting shots at the rim, Doug. Like, I expect that to go up, but his accuracy at the bucket, which is one of his strong suits, it's how he's made his pay in the NBA, is finishing at the rim for the most part. He's not really working there as well. It's a rough start for Miles Bridges, in my opinion.
That's all you can say. I mean, I was questioning after the game against Toronto where he went 2 of 11, only had 7 points. I was like, is something wrong? Because, I mean, even look, he had the great game in Atlanta where he had 27 points and was an efficient scorer in that game. And then at least he scored in double digits in the other 2 games, in the Houston game before Atlanta and the Miami game afterwards. And then to score in single digits in Toronto, and then the worrying thing is the 6 attempts. It's like, what's going on there? Because it's not as if, I mean, you do have Brandon Miller coming back in that game, but he's going to take some time to get going. Like, I think they still need Miles Bridges scoring regardless of, the availability of Brandon Miller. But as soon as Brandon Miller went out, you saw like Bridges go off in that Atlanta game because he was super aggressive and wanting to score the ball. And that just sort of went away for some reason. I think there was some kind of post on some sort of social media channel where Bridges, again, alluding to like he was going to get right. He did that in the offseason about his bounce. He did it last season. There were times when he would say, I know I'm playing bad right now. And then to his credit, he would typically play better after those posts. So maybe it's good. We see the post. Hopefully they see Bridges play a little bit better. I think on the defensive end, there have been some at least communication issues, and I don't know if I'm going to put it on Bridges, but when Miles and LaMelo have the pick and roll responsibility defensively, it gets a little dicey. I don't know what's going on there, but like I've noticed multiple times in multiple games, those two trying to figure out the pick and roll and not really figuring it out. And it's strange because these two guys are friends and they've played a lot together, and to not have sort of that figured out, I don't know if that's sort of a conflict with, again, learning new terminology or learning new schemes that Lee is putting in, but that hasn't looked great either. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely been a tough start for Miles.
So, yeah, for Miles, if we're having that conversation, Doug, this team has actually shot really well on the season to this point. They're top 5 in the NBA in shooting percentage, and they're top 3 in shooting frequency. That's without Brandon Miller. Brandon Miller is only going to help that when he comes back and he's back in the lineup permanently. Miles Bridges has done everything he can to bring that percentage down, shooting 3-pointers at 6 times a game and being honestly, at his position, among the league's worst. Small, maybe meaningless sample size. But we do know with Miles that he's been an average 3-point shooter to bad, with the one outlier season that we can always go back to. My biggest concern with Miles, even if he's like 34%, which isn't very good, 34% from 3 this year, let's just say he finishes around that number. I think the Hornets showing you that they can still be a good shooting team without him hitting above average, I think that's real. With LaMelo being on fire, Brandon Miller coming back, Grant Williams, Trey Mann's 3-ball is falling, all of that stuff, right? Josh Green, how about Josh Green, man? Love what we're getting from him making shots. I think that's a real thing. What I'm worried about, just to tick, is the fact that he's not converting at the bucket like anywhere close to what he even was doing, not only during his prime, but Doug, like he was in the 50th percentile last year. I think you can get back to that, but I was hoping for that number to go up, and now it's down.
Well, and you had a reason to hope for that, right? Because his percentage at the rim was 70th percentile the season before he went out for the felony domestic violence charges, and then 74th percentile, so well above average in the season prior to that. And then it goes from there to average last season, and now it's in the 24th percentile. He's hitting 58% of his shots at the rim versus 65% last season, 68% the season prior. And his effective field goal percentage is absolutely in the toilet. And so if you look at his shot profile this season so far, it looks a lot better than last season. He's taking less mid-range jump shots. He's taking more threes, more shots at the rim. He's just missing everything. So yeah, I mean, it's an issue. And then I'll also bring up that, in that first Boston Celtics game, the Hornets looked great for 3.5 quarters. And then the maturity of this young team, or the immaturity, I should say, reared its ugly head, and they sort of fell apart. LaMelo fouled out. Grant Williams had the, body check on Jason Tatum. And then you had Miles Bridges on a dead ball. Jason Tatum, I think it was Tatum that shot the ball, and Miles Bridges spikes it into the second row. Like, if you're Miles Bridges, like, the one thing you shouldn't do is take any object and put it into the crowd. Like, right? I mean, that should be the thing that sort of permeates the headspace for him, and he does it. And so it again brings this question of, like, when the pressure is on, how is he going to react? And when things aren't going well, will he have the resolve to, respond effectively and not like that? And he failed that early test.
So it's a new role for him. Maybe this goes better. In fact, he's not going to finish this poorly at the rim all season long, but it's just something to take note of, because the spacing is going to be better for you. The gravity with that LaMelo Brandon duo can only help create some kind of space for Miles cutting and driving to the rim. Same thing with Josh Green. If Josh Green is just going to be able to hit these threes when he's in the game, then the spacing is going to work quite nicely, especially if they go to the small ball lineup, Doug. Like, they started with Grant Williams out there. Grant Williams, that's the win, is the fact that now you have all the dudes out there on the floor. All of them are a threat. Like, okay, if everybody is a threat, that can only help you. So we'll check in like every handful of games, and then we'll get to the first 20, and that will be like a nice checkpoint to see, okay, are we on a trend, or is this still something of an outlier that we were talking about the first 5, 6, 10 games of the year? So that will be something that we'll just have to monitor. Go ahead. Next point that you have, Miles Bridges or otherwise.
Well, something to pay attention to, and I think it's too early to pull these numbers, but it'll be interesting to see what Miles looks like with LaMelo off the floor. And with, once we get Brandon in a few more games, like what it looks like with Miles Bridges with some of these bench lineups where LaMelo is not on the floor, because LaMelo without Brandon has really sucked up a lot of oxygen on the offensive end. And that's been good for the Charlotte Hornets. Like, don't get me wrong. I mean, he's been incredible. But, that's going to have, just inevitably, it's going to have effects on other players. And we could be seeing some of those effects laid into Miles Bridges here.
Okay, you go. I gave you Miles as my big takeaway, what we've seen. What's another one for you?
Tidjane, I think, looked really good in both of these games, particularly the first Celtics game, where I think he had the third highest game score according to Pivot Fade. I mean, he was excellent hitting his open three-point shots. He's still going to do some silly things, take some step-back threes where you go, okay, that probably wasn't the greatest shot. But he's well ahead of schedule. I feel like more and more comfortable. Every time he steps out on the floor and plays a little bit and makes fewer and fewer mistakes, I'm more and more comfortable with him getting, some kind of rotation role later in the season. And then we saw Nick Smith Jr. debut in that second Boston game. I thought the first shot that he took was like, oh, why is that the first shot that you take? Quick three-pointer, had no shot in transition. There was just much better offense that they could have run. He seemed to settle in a little bit, but not great there for the first attempt. And then my final observation is that the Hornets have 0 centers and 0 backup point guards. time is a flat circle. We just can't escape this vortex of not being able to have centers and not being able to have backup point guards with Vasa Micic in street clothes, not injured, just out of the rotation. That's weird. What's going on there? So if you happen to go to a home game at some point, Walker, maybe ask about it. Nobody else is asking about it. This guy that was supposed to be the backup point guard suddenly isn't. I don't get it. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I'll be there Wednesday. So, yeah, we'll see. It's been a hectic beginning of the season for me. I'm doing weddings again because I feel like I average a wedding every month of my life. But I will be there, and maybe we can. Like, the thing is...
the Panthers are good all of a sudden, too, so you got your hands full.
Bryce Young is now on his way up. But the Micic thing, I will say, like, we know what's happening. We're basically just getting the quote here from Charles Lee. But, Doug, you asked it. We talked about it, too, when it was just me and David last week. Around that time, Charles Lee was apparently thinking the exact same thing. Hey, one, it might be time to see Nick Smith Jr. soon. Two, are we just going to give all these minutes to Trey Mann and just not put Micic out on the floor? Like, both things ended up happening. And we were starting to question it, and Charles Lee ended up doing it. So, yeah, that's the big question.
Yeah, and look, Mann has looked really good scoring and defending. Passing is not his strongest suit. It's not that he can't pass, but he's been trying to make some pass. Like, he's been taking shots that I didn't see him take last season, and they're shots that wouldn't normally be good shots, and he's making them. And so that's like, oh, he's an elite scorer. He's doing the same thing with his passing, and the ball's flying out of bounds. So he's out. I think he's out ahead a little bit of his skis in the passing department. He's perfectly in his zone when it comes to scoring and defending. And so that's why it's like critical to have somebody alongside him like a Micic. If Micic just wasn't god-awful scoring, that could pass it.
Yeah, but man has been so good. Like, on both ends, he's been awesome to watch with all the effort. So fantastic stuff from Trey. Maybe we talk about him and do something else coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Bees everywhere!
We'll give you final observations plus preview the night ahead against Minnesota. Can the Hornets get back on the winning side of things? That's in the last segment, still to come. LOH. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the second half of the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5, get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. More Locked On Hornets coming up. Any final thoughts on the weekend, Doug? There was a lot to unpack. So anything else before we move on to Minnesota?
No, look, those were games against Boston that were always going to be tough. That's why you guys, I was proud of you for declaring the Toronto win a must win. They got it. And so, look, this early part of the season, it's all about learning lessons. And I think Charles Lee is letting this team run into some brick walls, whether it's not calling timeouts or allowing, LaMelo to guard Jason Tatum on an island, or, letting Miles Bridges work through these struggles. Like, I think they're just going to have to run into some brick walls. And I think fans, you've got nothing to do except to be patient and hope that there is a grander plan here to bring certain guys in or let certain guys go. But it's a long-term strategy. It's not, I don't think they're going to go and make it. Now, they may make me look like a fool as soon as we in this episode, but I don't think they're going to go look for another center. I think they're going to survive with Grant Williams and Moussa Diabate until they can get one of these guys in Richards or Williams back. The Williams stuff scares the crap out of me, by the way. I don't know if we've talked about that, but like the comments that Lee had before, I believe it was the second Celtics game, about Mark Williams' timeline, that he's doing individual stuff, but he's not doing team stuff. And then after team stuff, there's like another level. They've got this like plan for him. And I'm just thinking back to when he first got injured, and he made it sound like it wasn't a huge deal.
Yeah,
and he's still just doing individual stuff. Like, like what is going on?
He did. No, that did happen. You're right. I wonder if they're just being extra careful. It does seem a trend that's happening, Doug, is they're being careful with all these guys. Josh Green, too, where you're putting him in and out of the lineup. He's been in, right? He played over the weekend. So that's good news for Josh Green, who goes over to the bench, ices the Achilles. We know that there was the time where it was injury management that allowed him to be out. Well, same thing. We'll just use this as the transition to Minnesota. Same thing with Brandon Miller, who is questionable because of the left glute strain / injury management for this contest against Minnesota tonight. Jeffries, Nick Richards out with the shoulder injury. Mark Williams, of course, continues to be out with that left foot. So I think that's a trend we're seeing with this new training staff. Maybe it's not all that different from what I don't remember, I guess, the last couple of years, but it does seem like there is a trend of them being way more careful, hesitant to put these guys out there before they're 100% ready to go. These guys that used to ramp up, there'd be a problem. They're just not ramping them up anymore, right? Like they're trying to slowly, they're taking their time before they put them out there on the court again. And maybe they're just being extra cautious with Mark Williams.
Injury management is the new doubtful, right? I mean, this language that these teams are coming up with to avoid getting called into the principal's office on these injuries. It is funny to see that new language being used here with the Hornets, because you're right. It was Josh Green injury management. Now it's Brandon Miller injury management. I hope he plays. I hope he manages to play, because it's more exciting to see him play.
How about 4 of 5 from 3-point range for Josh Green in the second game against Boston? Still, like the real question for Josh is, he's been playing a very similar amount of minutes every single time he goes out there. I think it's been between 18 to 23. Played just a little over 20. Is that because of the injury management? That's something that I'd like to know. Maybe asking Charles, I can get to that. But is that because of the injury management and he wants him to be out there more? Or are you still like, no, we like Seth Curry out because, Seth Curry is a shot maker that's helped us quite a bit. I want to see how Josh Green's role continues to evolve as he gets healthier. But yeah, it is a lot more fun out there. If he's not out there, like, what are some of your thoughts with Minnesota? And then you can finish some of those Josh Green thoughts too as we move on.
I mean, Minnesota, it doesn't get any easier. I mean, they're playing, I don't know, quite as well as Boston right now, but the trade for Randall was a really good trade for Minnesota. Randall's been amazing. He scored 20 plus points in all but the season opener. And I mean, 8 of 15, 8 of 13, 7 of 13, 9 of 16. He is just relentless out there. He's not going to miss many shots. Anthony Edwards is noticing. Anthony Edwards is taking a lot more threes. When people ask, I think when reporters asked him what he thought about criticism of Anthony Edwards taking more threes, Anthony Edwards responded with bleep him. So he's playing free. He's playing well. Rudy Gobert is going to be a tough hang for the Charlotte Hornets because, look, he's not, obviously, like famously, he's not a very physical center, right? But he's taller than everyone that the Hornets can throw out there. So Grant Williams, Moussa Diabate, they're going to have their hands full. Whoever's guarding Julius Randle, I assume that's Miles Bridges. He's going to have his hands full. Dante DiVincenzo hasn't gotten it going yet, so I could fully expect him to get going against the Hornets. It's just, I don't have great feelings about this game, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, I don't either, especially with the size. Now, the Hornets did manage to out-rebound the Celtics by 1 in game 1, but that's at least some help from Nick Richards playing the 16 minutes that he did. And really the bench helped you quite a bit. Grant Williams, Diabate, and Salaun, they all
and that was incredible
combined.
Because in the first half, they got absolutely housed on the boards. And then in the second half of that first game,
similar to Houston,
yeah, they really, whatever was said or what maybe it wasn't said, and they just like knew, hey, we're getting housed on the boards right now. We got to change that. That's the cool thing about this team is that despite all of the injuries and despite some of the micro issues that we get into on this show because we're on every day and we put the microscope on this team, like despite all of that, they're trying immensely hard in these games, and they are playing better in areas that they weren't playing last season, particularly on the boards. They're crashing the boards a lot, getting a lot of offensive rebounds, second chance opportunities. I mean, again, it's going to be more difficult in this game against Minnesota, I think. But it's a much more fun team to watch because, like, principally, they're more sound than they were a year ago.
Yeah. So this game against Minnesota's 3-3 on the year. They do have their last game that they won against the Denver Nuggets. So big time win for them there. And we know that Minnesota is going to hit the boards because of the size that they have here with Julius Randle, who's just kind of this tenacious, fun basketball player. Some guys don't know what to do with him, but he's just kind of a baller. And also Rudy Gobert, as you mentioned, the size is going to hurt. When you don't have Nick Richards, you don't have Mark Williams. I mean, even Diabate, who is your emergency center, is somewhat on the shorter side. Like, I guess this is just the classic, hey, put Grant out there on the perimeter, and can he hit enough threes to hurt you with Rudy Gobert in the game? Can this be like a Grant Williams take 6, 7, 8 3-pointers and like have him cash in on, can we get half of them? Like, can you shoot 50% to where that's where you can just somewhat randomize the game and be able to create as many open lanes as possible? When Rudy is out, can you hurt Minnesota there by any chance? Yeah. That's what you're kind of looking at in the front court and at the center spot, specifically because they don't really have a center to go against a multiple-time Defensive Player of the Year.
Yeah, and look, I mean, there are areas that they can make some moves, like turnovers. I think if they can maximize the turnovers that are going to happen from Minnesota, they don't like protect the basketball all that well. The Hornets have had a problem this season, interestingly. Like, they've been able to generate turnovers. It's when they get into transition that sometimes things fall apart. They haven't been necessarily able to connect on as many points off of turnovers as some other teams. So if they can limit their own turnovers and then connect on those opportunities, Minnesota will give them those looks. I mean, they're not a dominant defensive team right now. So, I think there's going to be a shot for them. But again, I think Minnesota is going to come in looking to expose the lack of a center for Charlotte. And so, now this will be a great challenge for Lee. Like, what do you do to sort of counter that if they're going to go to Rudy a lot? And they did that. There was a game last season where Minnesota, again, different construction of team with Cat instead of Julius Randle. But there was a game, I don't know if you remember last season, where the Hornets were without like a traditional center. I think it was during a Nick Richards injury, and Minnesota tried that, and the Hornets boat raced them and just like got out into transition and were able to counter that. And I'm not sure if that was the game that they won, but they can do it, but it's just going to be a really tough task.
I feel like the offensive rebounding numbers that have been so good for Charlotte this season, I think those are going to be neutralized. That it just feels like that's going to happen in this game specifically against the Timberwolves. So if it's been such a strong suit for Charlotte and Minnesota takes that away, like, it just puts the pressure a lot more on you hitting your shots. Like, you got to continue to be a hot shooting team if you want a chance to win this game. But the good news is they've shown that. And if Brandon Miller plays, maybe he's knocking off some rust from that first game that he played. Not a great shot against the Celtics the second time that he was able to suit up. Missed a lot of 2-pointers as well. Like, missed a lot from that 10 feet in area. He had the transition dunk, which was really nice, but he missed a lot of shots from that 10-foot in, only 2 mid-rangers, and then hit a couple threes. So we'll see about Brandon. But once this team gets healthier, you have to like overall what you see, and there's still some things to iron out. And it's exactly what we expected with Charles Lee, a new coach taking over for a team that's looking to establish a winning culture, especially against what is a tough stretch of the schedule early on in the season. That's the nice part. Doug, this is fine, right? There's no panicking at all by any stretch. There's no panicking. We're just talking about some stuff that still needs to be fixed. So overall, still got our eyes on the prize. That'll do it.
Yeah,
for Locked On
I think
Hornets.
you have a coach now that I think is going to be focused on making some of these fixes. I mean, I think that's the difference from you don't have an interim coach anymore. You have a guy that has a long-term plan that's ready to install it, has the energy to install it, the intensity to install it, and honestly, the honesty to install it. I mean, he's critiquing not just LaMelo, but he's critiquing this team in a way that I think is constructive, but at the same time, it's honest in a way that we haven't seen in years prior, and that's encouraging.
That'll do it for Locked On Hornets. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free. We're available anywhere you get your podcast. And that does include YouTube. Doug Branson Substack is everyhornetsboxscore.com. You can text him there as well. I'm Walker Mehl. Listen to me on WFNZ every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m. And if you want Doug's NBA takes, well, good news. You can listen to those as well. Locked On NBA with Matt Moore and Hayes from the Locked On Bulls podcast. So a fun new show that has been established now for about 2 weeks' time. Locked On NBA. Your boy Doug is on that now as well. Have a great rest of your day. We'll be back with you tomorrow.